Hello and welcome to the 40 Athletes Podcast. But before we begin, I'd like to take you all to 40athletes.com. Make sure you head to our website and download the 40 Athletes lead generator of the Mamba mentality. It's a free ebook that will share with you how to get a more prolific mentality just like Kobe Bryant. Now, again, check out 40athletes.com and check out the Mamba mentality ebook today. Be sure to type in your email and it'll be sent right to your inbox. Now, let's begin. Welcome to episode 75 of the 4D Athletes Podcast. I'm your co-host, Jason Holzer, along with my good friend, Jimmy Huber. Jimmy, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Jason.
Well, today, man, it's an exciting podcast, but it's also bittersweet in a lot of ways. We're talking with Leslie Weirich, and she is an advocate for youth suicide prevention. That's something that's really hit me personally in my own life. But connecting with Leslie over the last month and hearing her story, she has really taken her pain point in her life and made it a great purpose. And she is a wealth of knowledge and she is a wealth of advocacy for mental health, mental wellness. And we're excited to have her on today.
Yeah, and I know this speaks, closely to you and your life and your heart. So when you mentioned we're bringing her on, and I went through and looked at a bunch of information, I was like, wow, this is going to be great. And it's at a perfect time. I don't think it's ever a perfect time, but it's at a time that's needed with what she's doing and creating awareness so we can help people out that are really struggling with their mental health.
Yeah, I mean, you look at recently the amount of college kids that you see that are taking their own life, athletes, non-athletes, you name it. But it's been in the story like there are 3 or 4 in like just the last month or so that that's just what we've heard about, and so it reemphasizes the point of like we've got to help our young people develop stronger mental health sooner in life, so when they become these young adults, they have the tools and techniques to handle it when challenges come up. So, just a little bit about Leslie. She is part of the Elkhart County Suicide Prevention Coalition board member, Innovations in Suicide Prevention Task Force in the state of Indiana. She's mental health use certified, QPR certified, which we could get into as well. And she's just been a strong advocate and speaker across colleges and universities in the United States. So we're going to go ahead and bring Leslie on this morning. Leslie, welcome to the show today. Thank you for joining us. I know you joined us with a heavy heart this morning with some recent events that have happened in your life. But again, thank you for taking the time this morning to join us.
Well, thank you, Jason and Jim, for inviting me on your podcast. I've followed you guys for a long time, and I absolutely love the work that you do with young athletes. So, our story hits very close to my heart. And because I had a young student athlete and that I no longer have here on this earth. So I really appreciate you guys, the work that you do also.
Well, Leslie, here's just the stats according to the CDC that second leading cause of death among individuals between ages 10 to 34 is suicide. It's a 57% suicide rate increase. 132 people die in the U.S. alone a day by that. What is some of this because of the isolation, because of, what we just went through with COVID? Is it too much, alone time, not enough, socialization where you're around positive people? What do you think are some of the contributing factors to such a dramatic increase of these numbers?
Well, it's a great question. It's a great place to start, and if you don't mind, could I share a little bit of our story with your listeners first and give them a little information?
Yes, absolutely. Let's go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, let's dive into that.
So our son, Austin, died by suicide on September the 10th of 2016. And for your listeners that may not even know the significance of that day, is World Suicide Prevention Awareness Day. So by sheer coincidence, our son took his life on that day. He was 20 years old. He was a junior football player at Wabash College, which is one of the last 3 remaining all-male colleges in the U.S. We can talk about that in a little bit. But so if to describe my son to you and anyone who knew him, he would be what the world would call an overachiever, Jason and Jim. I mean, he, if there was a goal, he crushed it, and he graduated above a perfect 4.0 in high school because he took weighted honors classes. He ran track and played football. I mean, track, he really ran to kind of improve his footwork for football and everything, because he was a big guy, 6'4", 240 pounds, defensive end. But he ran track and played football all 4 years for the discipline of, the footwork and the speed and everything. He also ran track in the spring. So excellent student, was voted scholar athlete in one or both of those sports, all 4 years of high school. As I said, graduated above a perfect 4.0, receiving $26,000 in renewable academic scholarships, was the only student chosen at his high school for something called the Hugh O'Brien Leadership Award. You have to be nominated by the staff and the principal. So he went to a leadership conference. So, just a great, well-rounded kid, membership of Fellowship of Christian Athletes member, coached the younger kids, was a Stay in Bounds ambassador, went to the elementary schools to speak to the littles. So, just everyone, look like, and I share Austin's accomplishments only for one reason. I don't share them to boast about my son, although we were proud of him. I share it with people to tell you that's the face of suicide. That's the face of suicide. So what makes our story really rare and unique, which I know both of you are aware of, the first year after Austin's death, was a blur. We were just in our grief, getting through it day by day. And in the second year, we were really trying to kind of figure out what to do with our story and how we could help others. So on the 2-year anniversary of Austin's death, which would be September 10th of 2018, once again, World Suicide Prevention Awareness Day, that evening, my husband and I received a text message from one of Austin's former roommates. And he said, Mr. and Mrs. Weirich, I don't know if you heard, but Evan Hansen, the co-captain of the Wabash football team, took his life today. And I'm sorry to have to tell you that, especially today, but I just didn't want you to hear about it on the news. So now, once again, our grief, which we're still trying to figure out how to navigate through, is now compounded as we shared it with another family, the Hansen family out of Carmel, Indiana. Tell you a little bit about Evan. Evan was 21 years old, about to graduate with a double major in Spanish and biology. He'd actually just been recognized that Saturday as the co-captain of the team on Senior Saturday. So his mom and dad were there at the game with him. He went to football practice on Sunday and talked to all his teammates, his coaches. By all appearances, everything was fine. On Monday morning, Evan walked into the woods and gave up hope. And his dad found his body. So we are very, very close with the Hansen family. They're our good friends now. Our backstories are different. So to get around to answering your original question, Jason, I always say suicide is so complex and it's so complicated, because even though Austin and Evan played on the same team, and we were interviewed by the Indianapolis Star within 2 weeks of Evan's death, we shared our story with the Hansens. And by that following weekend, of course, our story made national news because it was so rare that both young men played on the same team at the same small all-male college. I couldn't make this story up if I tried, nor would I ever want to. But it gave us an opportunity and a platform to speak out and share and try to help other families. And so Evan Hansen's family donated his body up to Boston for research, and it came back confirmed for stage 1 CTE. Chronic traumatic encephaly. Evan had been playing tackle football since he was 7 years old. He was a great player, played all through high school and college. So I am actually an advocate for not letting young boys play tackle football that early. That's a whole nother topic. We could do that, another podcast on the reasons why. But so Austin's story dealt with a relationship, the breakup of a relationship, which a lot of young men that have that in their backstory was suicide. And so there are, even though our sons played football, knew each other, went to the same college, their backstories were very different. So to get to answering your question, Jason, it's complicated because I think there are many things that cause suicide. I think there can be many contributing factors. As I tell everybody, like Austin and Evan, their stories are different, but it comes to that one heightened moment in time when they can't see to the next moment that things are going to get better. Because as I tell every young person when I speak to them, just because you're having suicidal ideation or a suicidal thought does not mean you're weird, does not mean you're crazy. We all have gone through tough times in our lives. But let's talk about how to hold on and get you through that moment. Because what's very important to note here for your listeners is research, evidence tells us that when you're in that heightened state of suicidal ideation, that amount of pain in your brain lasts about 20 to 30 minutes in that heightened state. If we can get them and give them tools to hold on in that moment till we can get help to them, they will never have that much of a suicidal ideation moment again in their lives. Research tells us that. So what do we do in that moment? So when you talk about college athletes, there's so many factors. They've moved away from home, right? So they're trying to navigate, what does life look like without, mom cooking a meal for me or doing my laundry, or, so it's kind of the life skills they're learning too, some life skills there. Then you put on top of that the academic pressure to perform well in school. They may be on scholarships. They may have to keep their grades above a certain GPA in order to be able to, participate in sports. You throw injury in there. You throw football injury in there. And I'll share with you, my son in his freshman year, Austin had 3 back-to-back football injuries in an 8-week period of time. And I look back as a mom and I realized that really started his downward spiral his freshman year. And the final injury that he had actually was in a practice, and he was down in a stand and he actually dislocated an elbow. But because he was such a big guy and he'd already had 2 previous injuries, they actually took him to the hospital because they had to put him under sedation in order to put that elbow back in. And that injury took him out for the season, which really, my son's identity was wrapped up in football. He loved the game. So who was he if he wasn't a college football player? And I really realized that really started my son's downward spiral.
Hey, Leslie, there's a lot to unpack. And I want to start with, you've mentioned before that, suicide in general, it doesn't look like Austin and Evan, right? And you say like it's an equal opportunity, like employer. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter what skin color it is you have. It doesn't matter where you're from, or it doesn't matter. And what you talked about earlier, though, regards to Austin, he was an overachiever. And I see it a lot with people who are overachievers. They're perfectionists and they put pressure on themselves, right? And it's never good enough. Can you speak to that and what we can do to maybe help young people and people in general to how to not beat themselves up so much?
Wow, Jim, that's like probably the question of the hour here, because I actually was invited to do my first TEDx talk. It's been postponed till fall, but it'll be on Austin's campus. And the topic of my talk is how perfectionism killed my son. And, so when I look back, and Austin's dad and I look back through high school, through middle school, when he was growing up, if Austin had a bad day, he'd stay an hour longer in the weight room and lift weights. Or he'd get up an hour earlier and study for a calculus test. I mean, he just put this intense pressure on himself. And I see so many parents today, and I've met with so many families who've lost beautiful young sons and daughters. And there is a pattern. And I tell people, parents mean well. You want to have your kids in sports because there's so many great things that you can learn from sports. But the young brain also needs time to rest and grow. And the teenage brain needs the most amount of sleep of any brain. So when you take a kid like Austin, or even Evan was an overachiever as well. And, you're going on very little sleep. You're going on, just all this pressure in college. And so it's never, ever good enough. And to get back to the perfectionism question, Jim, for my son, everything had to line up and be perfect, from grades to athletics to everything. In his life, the weak link for my son was always relationships in high school and college. Relationships are never perfect, but when you're that age, you're really trying to figure things out. So I tell parents, if I could change one thing, if I could go back and do one thing differently as a parent, I'm an open book. I was a bit of a helicopter mom. I tried to rescue my kids. And, we have to let our kids fail young and teach them how to fail well. And that might sound like an oxymoron, failing well, but there's an art form to teaching your kids how to fail well. And, I mean, I have these moms all the time reaching out to me. Their kids are struggling. And I said, obviously, we don't have enough therapists in the country today. That's a whole nother topic, getting help for your kids. But recognizing early in life with kids when they're having these things that, you have this dream for your kid, right? And I always say, make sure that they have their own dream, because so many parents put so much pressure on their kids, and well-meaning. I'm not here to criticize any parent. I lost my son to suicide. I'm not a perfect mom, but I'm saying learn from my story. So make sure that when your kids are growing up and something goes wrong in their life, that you really sit down and have that conversation with them about, this is not the end of the world. Let's talk about what happened. Let's talk about what we can learn from that. This is actually a very good segue for me to go into what I'm doing now, but and why we're teaching kids at a very early age. We call it the upstream approach. We want to teach kids resiliency. And I know that's a lot of your program too. We want to teach kids resiliency. And so they know not if, but when. Look what we've just lived through, right? In the last 2.5 years, when life gets hard, you have a go-to. You have a go-to. So talking about perfectionism in these kids, it has to start very early at teaching them life's not perfect and things don't line up, and you're going to get disappointed, and you're not going to get picked to be on the team, and you're going to get injured. Let's figure out what are the tools and techniques that we can teach our kids really early to deal with disappointment, so they can use it to build resiliency as they get older, when they have real disappointment in life, right?
And I think, Leslie, too, as a parent, this is something that, as you're getting into it, I feel like parents and coaches in general, we recognize when our sons or daughters or our athletes do great stuff, right? When they succeed. And we're so excited when they have successful moments in sports or whatever. But I think it's key is when they don't do well.
Absolutely.
When they get back up and to identify and say, Jason, man, I noticed how you missed that shot, but you came back. You're like 0 for 5 and you kept being aggressive, or, you fell down and there was a bad call, but you didn't let it, you played next play mentality or whatever it is, or you guys didn't succeed, but you went over and had good sportsmanship afterwards. I think it's stuff like to honor them, to understand, like you said, you don't have to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes, and it's okay, but honor the things that they're doing to get back up, to have that resiliency in life, and recognize that, so they don't feel like they have to be perfect. And if they're not perfect, they're not getting loved by their coaches, their parents, or people in their lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, our culture just breeds that, mentality of, the winners, right? And, and so I think, and I honestly, even when we were sitting at Austin's senior awards night, my husband and I kind of like slid down in the seat, because like every other name being mentioned for a scholarship was Austin Weirich. And we were like, and I shared this is one of my bittersweet memories. One of his best friends in high school, his dad came over, and just a great kid. We still keep in touch with him. He walked in our Memorial 5K with us. They were good friends in high school. The dad came up to us after the awards that night, because Austin he cleaned up. He won so many. His dad came up and said, wow, I told his friend's name was Alex. He's like, I told Alex, you need to hang out more with Austin Weirich, because he's going to be like president of the United States. Well, guess what? Alex just got engaged. This great kid, is a financial planner now, graduated college, and I think about that. I think, wow, I think about Alex's dad's words to us and how life turned out. And so it's always my message to say to people, check on your young people, check on your friends, check on everybody, because listen, a beautiful package doesn't mean that there's not a lot of despair on the inside. We need to really be checking on our kids. And I know we have limited time, so I do definitely want to mention the work that I'm doing, and I'll try to hold this up for so you guys can see it. So when you talk about resiliency, this is my favorite tool, and it's called Sources of Strength. And it's an evidence-based suicide prevention program that rarely mentions the word suicide. We go in and we teach kids how to lean on, protective factors. And people always ask me about risk factors and did I see warning signs? And we can talk about that all day long. You can look those up. We can have a discussion. But I always say, I want to talk about protective factors here. I want to talk about prevention. And it starts early, Jim. So your question's a good one. You know, that perfectionism has to be watched very early in life. And you have to start training them through resiliency in order to be able to handle disappointment. So this program, we go into schools and it has 8 protective factors. Some kids have some in their lives. Some kids have maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5. But the beauty of this wheel, and I know I can kind of
what are they on that,
I'll
Leslie?
tell you right now. I have a big one, but it'll be too big for the screen. So the beauty of this wheel is we all have some part of this in our lives, no matter what it is. So the first 3 on this wheel are who's your people, who's in your life. And we know this looks different for different kids because I talk in some really tough schools and some really tough areas. So I have to be very sensitive on some of these. Family support. What does that look like and show up for you in your life? And we work through this. This is very engaging. The kids are writing when we're doing this, we're teaching. So they have to write down who their family support is. It might be a mom or a dad, but it also could be like a grandfather or an uncle or somebody like that, or, you know, or it could be chosen family. Some of these kids don't have the family that we think of. You know, we talk about chosen family. We talk about adopted family. We talk about, so family support, positive friends. Okay, let's talk about that one. Positive friends. So some of the kids, we have to identify the qualities of a positive friend. What does it mean to be a positive friend? You know, what does it look like if you have a positive friend show up in your life? So we identify those qualities, and then if they have a positive friend.
Hey, Leslie, I want you to keep going that, but I want you to go back also to when you talk about relationships. You mentioned Austin had what you would call a toxic relationship
Correct.
in college. What can parents do when they see their kids in maybe a toxic relationship?
Right. Great question. And I'll get through the wheel with you, but I'll answer that question real quick. So I was just down at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, the week before Christmas. I spoke to 4,400 soldiers, and I was invited there because they'd had 20 suicides last year on base. And some people like cringe when I say that. You know, it's a large Army base. The chaplain invited me, and they wanted a mom to come with a story because guess what? 19 out of the 20 suicides, those are young active duty soldiers, 19 to 24 years old. 19 of the 20 were over relationships. Okay. So you have kind of the perfect recipe for suicide there. You've got firearms, right? You've got young emotions, and you sometimes throw in alcohol or drugs. And then you've got that immature brain because it's not fully developed till it's 27 years old. We know that now. So you put those together and it's a recipe for suicide. So I went in there with the 8 toxic warning signs of an unhealthy relationship. And I talked to those soldiers about if they recognized any of those. I actually told them to lock up their firearms. And I can share more with you of the lives that were, you know, and I'm honored to say I've gotten a lot of feedback from the base, the lives that were saved after my talk. But when you see your kid, this is what I will say, and it pertains to suicide as well. The biggest sign that I see when people are in toxic relationships, there's many times there's a controlling factor there. When you see your son or your daughter who always loved to do something, whether it was football or soccer or music, whatever, when you see their interests changing, when you see them pulling away from the things that they used to love to do, even friends and family and everything, because this person's like, you have to be with me all the time. You know, it's a very controlling, immature relationship. That's a red flag. And I would say, Jim, you know, once again, we go back to there are not enough good therapists in this world, but I would say that's a time to be getting some professional help and getting some to work with them on what a healthy relationship looks like. Because, you know, at that age, hormones are strong. You know, this is the one, this is the only one they're ever going to have in their life. So really kind of helping them navigate through, you know, what is a healthy relationship and what should it look like. And that really many, many times involves calling in a professional for help. So we did have Austin in therapy over the summer. He was actually seeing a therapist. And he had told us the relationship had ended. He actually knew her less than 6 months. I don't spend a lot of time talking about it because it's only one factor. But Austin had decided not to play football that year, his junior year, because he'd had all those injuries and he was going to start to concentrate on applying for grad school, either law school or getting his MBA. So we thought, well, that's a good thing he's not playing football, and he can focus just on, getting his life ready to graduate. And so that the day that Austin died, I FaceTimed with my son for 45 minutes that afternoon. I mean, he was on top of the world. I mean, Jason and Jim, I could tell you, it was a great conversation. I hold that conversation every time I want to remember my son, what we talked about, his classes. And, there was he was a big Notre Dame fan because, we live in Indiana. And so they were going out, the football team had a bye weekend and he was still living with the players. So they were going to go out and watch a Notre Dame game at the home of one of his buddies that lived close by. He told us all his plans. They were going out for burgers that night with the guys. And, we tracked his credit card. Everything he told us, he did. 6:00 that evening, he called his dad. His dad was out mowing the grass. He turned the lawnmower off and talked to him. So grateful he took the time to do that. And at 4:30 that afternoon, my son lifted weights and worked out. It's not exactly something you're going to do if you're planning on taking your life. So every suicide's so unique. Some are impulsive, some are planned. Austin's was very impulsive. So he was out with his friends. And she texted him. It was a surprise. She was on the way. She lived up in Chicago and she showed up. And approximately 2 hours later, our son took his life. And she was there with him. Yeah. So we really try to work on, and that's what I love about my program, is building this sense of self-worth and self-esteem in these kids. So they really, and I think part of the reason Austin was kind of drawn into even that toxic relationship was sort of his loss of being able to play football, so it's complicated. He lost his identity. So he was really searching for, his worth and his value. And, he's a young man. He's going to look for a girlfriend, right? So I think kind of overlooking, and he even made some comments to some adult friends, my mom and dad are right. This is probably not the most healthy relationship. But he was really trying to fill that void because he was no longer a college football player.
Yeah. Well, Leslie, too, you mentioned community support. And that was one thing that I was very fortunate to have whenever I was 17 and lost my dad to suicide. Was my uncles were there for me. I had great friends that supported me, that surrounded me, checked on me often. And they never tried to fix anything. They just tried to keep me interested in the things that I was interested in before, to try and create my new normalcy. And that helped me build that resilience to get through those tough times, to know that people cared. Because I think enough of it is just knowing people care about you.
Right.
Can be just enough to get you through some of those tough moments, and whenever I think of resiliency, one of the best definitions I heard was the ability to seek positive outcomes mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically, despite a setback or despite an adverse situation. And I think too many of us haven't been taught that haven't been trained that resiliency muscle. When challenges happen, we tend to fold, as opposed to what's the lesson I'm learning here? What's the positive? What's the opportunity? And because it's really not taught, it's not something that's emphasized very much. I mean, in sports, great coaches will emphasize resiliency and try to work through it. But, what are some ways, I know you have your SOS training. How can we get that more as a priority in schools in younger ages, where it's kindergarten, first grade? We're talking about this stuff at the very beginning, and we're not waiting till high school, because almost high school, that's almost too late, because they have their teenage brain is that kind of thing. So when they're moldable and younger, how can we get them to think more of resiliency? What's that look like? That kind of thing.
Right. Well, I want to go back to my wheel and finish it real quick, and I want to answer your question. Okay. So go through this wheel quickly. So the first three are people that show up in our lives. So the first three are, as I said, our family support, positive friends, mentors. And I know you guys talk about mentors a lot in your program. Here's a data point for you. Did you know that if you put a mentor in a young person's life, say middle school, high school, and they follow them through their lives, okay, they're 80% less likely to develop a drug and alcohol problem in their lives. How many suicides involve drugs and alcohol? Over 50%. Wow. So that's an incredibly protective factor. We call these protective factors, okay? I'm going to get to your resiliency question. So those are our people: family support, positive friends, and mentors. We work through what that looks like in their lives. The next three are, what do we do? Healthy activities, which sports is one, of course. Art, music. Healthy activities can be a lot of different things. We work through what that looks like in their lives. Generosity. I tell the kids generosity is my superpower. So generosity, the brain, our brain is so interesting. And I teach in a lot of health education classes because I teach a lot of brain science, because it's interesting if you can help these kids understand why they do what they do. It doesn't mean their prefrontal cortex is going to be ready early. I'm talking about this neuroscience here this morning. But if you help them understand their big three emotions they go to under stress, we all do, are either anxiety, anger, or sadness. They're our go-tos. We go to them. So we identify what is their go-to emotion under stress. And sometimes I'll tell the kids, it can be a blended smoothie of all three, depending on the situation. But we identify when I feel angry, when I feel sad, okay? Then we work the wheel with them. So then generosity, do you know that the brain is incapable of being angry and grateful at the same moment? You can't do it. You can't be angry about something and be thankful for something. You can't be stressed out about something and thankful for something. So I work with these kids on teaching them what I call neuroplasticity, kind of remapping and rewiring their stress level in their brains with gratitude. I make every kid that I work with, every young person, I say to them, I want you to write down, I give them these cards. My 3 reasons for living today are. And I tell them, I say, listen, it can be your dog. I love dogs. I said, it can be anything. It can be that you scored a goal yesterday in soccer, whatever it is. My 3 reasons for living. And, most of them have phones, right? So I tell them, I want you to take a picture of your card and I want you to keep it on your phone. I'm getting to resiliency here, Jason. When you are getting ready to take a big test or, something happened, you're stressed out, I want you to say those 3 things out loud 3 times in a row, 3 times a day. I make them do like a covenant agreement with their teachers. They do this. And in 21 days, I want you to check in with your teacher. And I want you to tell your teacher what that's done for you. Because, we know it takes 21 days to develop a habit. So you're remapping and you're rewiring those neural pathways in their brain that can just turn to stress or turn to anger. You're rewiring and remapping them. It sounds so simple, but it works. It actually works. So we talk about generosity. We talk about what generosity looks like. I'll say, hey, generosity can just be, you notice somebody's having a bad day and you go up and you're like, hey man, how's it going? What's happening? That's generosity. So we talk about generosity and then spirituality and faith. Okay. So those are, and what does that look like in their life? Is it meditation? Do they have a church? Are they in a youth group? How does that show up in their life? Are they in a mosque, a synagogue? So we talk about that. So we've got the who's in your life, your people, the what do you do? And then the last one, we know 2 sides of the same coin, physical health and mental health. And I really wish we could talk about those together in our country rather than separately.
Yeah.
So what we do is we go into a school. Now I'm going to talk about middle and high school, and then we do have this in an elementary school model. So it is very important to start early to build resiliency. We call this the upstream approach to suicide prevention, because we said we don't want to get our kids when they're ready to jump off the bridge. We want to move upstream and teach them resiliency when they're little, when they're your kids' age, right? So they understand we're going to fall down, we're going to get our hearts broken, but we're going to get through it. Because what would these kids do then when we work the wheel? We teach them. So when I feel angry, I will text a positive friend to go shoot some hoops after school. So the more of these factors that you put in a kid's life, the more, that's why we call them protective factors, the less likely they ever are to self-harm. We can talk about cutting a lot with young women, self-harm, turn to drugs and alcohol, use maladaptive coping skills. So we're trying to teach them healthy coping skills, which is resiliency, in an early age. And we do have an elementary school model, but I want to tell you the beauty of this program and some data from this program. I'm not a statistician, but I love a little data point that points this out. So we go into the school with this program. We have it fully funded now. I work with our community mental health center, and we have gone and secured private funding because I live in the RV capital of the world. And the RV manufacturers have done very well during COVID. So I go in and I share our story. It's a hard story to hear about our son and the details of what happened that evening. And I say to them, these young people in our community that are dying by suicide, they're your employees' children. You need to care about these programs because it's going to impact your employee if their child dies by suicide. So we have had a lot of generosity. Speaking of generosity, a lot of generosity in our community to be donating to this. So we go in, the first thing we do, we set up a 90-minute, we call this a wellness program. It's not even suicide prevention, because when you teach wellness, guess what happens, Jason and Jim? You prevent bullying, you reduce school violence, you prevent suicide. So that's teaching resiliency, teaching wellness. So we go in for 90 minutes and I tell the school, I say, I want every adult who has a touch point with a student to be in this training. So I don't just want your teachers and your coaches. I mean, I want them, but I also want your bus drivers. I also want your cafeteria lunch ladies. I want everybody that would ever overhear a comment or a conversation that a young person might make during the day, right? We bring them in. We do a 90-minute wellness training. We work the wheel in their lives. This wheel is for all of our lives. It's for college. It's for adults. I'm getting ready to do it in an adult setting next week and teach a whole group of adults. What do their sources of strength look like in their lives? What do they turn to under times of stress? So it works. It works beautifully in all aspects of life. So we go in there. We do this 90-minute wellness training with everybody. That's the adults in the building working with the kids. From that point on, we say, now who would be interested in becoming an adult advisor in this program for this school? So from there, the adult advisors, and they can be, I really like to tap into the community. We want them to be in the schools, love coaches to be in there. And I've got my tennis coach in one of my programs. I've got a lot of coaches that are adult advisors now, teachers, guidance counselors, bus drivers, anybody. So from there, we identify 10% of the student population, a diverse group. I have to work with the schools. When I say diverse, I say, listen, we want 10% of a diverse group of your student population to be tapped as our peer leaders. This is a peer-run, student-run program. So the kids own this program. That's the beauty of it and why it works. So I say, listen, I don't want your whole football team to be peer leaders. I want one football player. I want one kid in the band, not your whole marching band. And I'll even have teachers, sometimes I'll butt up against them a little and they'll say, Leslie, I don't want to nominate them for peer leader because, they're always a behavioral problem in my classroom. And I said, let's talk about that. They're an influencer. Somebody's listening to them, right? We need to work on teaching them resiliency, Jason, and changing that script around, right? So we want a diverse population. I always say, if you can go into the school cafeteria and you can pick a kid from every table that's a peer leader, you've probably done a good job of choosing your peer leaders. So once we've identified, and COVID's messed up our numbers a little bit, so we're more looking for like 7% now, but ultimately by year 3, we want it to be up to 10%. For every 7 to 10 peer leaders, we need one adult advisor. And then once we've nominated them, they have a letter, it goes home to their family, they are nominated to be a peer leader. We set up a 6-hour training day. The first 3 hours, we bring in the adult advisors. And then the second 3 hours, the adult advisors stay all day. We bring in the peer leaders and we train them. And we say, we're not training these young people to be junior psychologists. But guess what? Evidence shows us that a peer leader, AKA another student, is 4 times more likely to identify another student who's at risk or at harm of, at harming themselves in any given day of the week before an adult would even know about it. So what we're trying to do is build those relationships up. And that's very, very important to have those trusted adults in the building. So when your friend is struggling and they're in class, or you see them cutting in the bathroom, or they're struggling with vaping or whatever, because you have built that relationship up in that program with an adult advisor, are more apt to take your friend and say, hey, man, let's go get some help. I know somebody you can talk to here.
Hey, Leslie, when you talk about the resiliency tips that you had, and you talk about you had something on your wrist, and what are some practical things that maybe individuals can implement, and maybe
Sure.
they don't have support systems around them. They're in that moment and they got to change their thought because they're going down that path that could lead into suicide. What
Sure.
are some of those practical tips you give to people?
2 things I give everywhere I speak. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, and I want to give a shout out, love to my LinkedIn followers who have supported me for the past year. This is a crisis text line wristband that I'm wearing. I wear it all the time. It says leslieshope.org, which is my organization. And then it says text home, HOME. It's short. You can say any word, but I use home. Text home to 741-741. I give every kid after I speak. I just gave 1,000 of these out at a freshman academy. So the reason why I do not give the suicide hotline number, I've been asked that question a lot. We're dealing with a young brain. We're dealing with a short attention span. Teens, young adults, college kids, they don't dial their phone. When's the last time you seen them call a friend? They text. They text if they're in the same room together, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I put the text crisis hotline on there. I explain to them, this is how this goes. You're at a party, you get in trouble. And you're like, oh man, I'm in trouble. I'm going to get kicked out of school. My parents are going to be mad. Whatever the case may be, you break up with a boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever it is. You text this at any time, 24/7, free of charge. You text this number, 741-741. We can put it in your show notes too. And a trained counselor will respond in under 5 minutes. Okay. So I teach these kids, I'm like, we've talked a lot about their brain by now. They've heard my story. This is kind of getting toward the end of my talk. It's a 90-minute presentation that I do in health education classes. We cover a lot of information. And I say to them, so you are not going to harm yourself. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to text, before you do anything, you're going to text this number. And I said, they're going to make sure you're okay. They're going to make sure you're not sitting there with a loaded gun or a bottle of pills. They're going to make sure you're okay. And then you get to tell them as much or as little as you want to about your situation. So I work them, and I say, one thing I say to the kids or the young people I talk to, I say, listen, I share a lot with them. They know my whole story by the time I leave. I said, I've shared a lot with you in here. It's time for you guys to be honest, and let's get real. How many of you, let's just say the past 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, have had a day where it's been so hard? You go, I just don't know if I can be here tomorrow. I just don't know if I can hang on. And I want you to raise your hand and tell me if you feel that way. And the hands go up. And I tell myself, I don't want you to worry about your friends to the right or the left. I want you just to think about you right now. The hands go up. They're honest. And then I say to them, okay, I'm going to give you 2 things. How many of you, if you had a way to reach out when you felt that way, you would use it? You would use it. And then they raise their hand. I go, okay, I got a couple things for you. So I give them this. We talk about how to use it, right? My other thing that I give them, which I absolutely love, and I give to every parent, every adult, anybody that works with young people or anybody, is the Not Okay app. Not Okay app. And the Not Okay app, it's a GPS locator. These things are so simple, but they work because you're trying to get that pause button in there in that suicidal moment, right? So you can get help for them so they don't die in that moment. We got to get them to hold on. The Not Okay app, it's a GPS locator. It's free. And we can put this in your show notes as well. And you can put up to 5 your trusted circle people in your app. I always tell the kids, try to put at least 2. Some kids don't even have 2. We have to work with that depending on their life. So we get this app put on their phone. And the people that they're sending it to have to accept, so they know they're in their circle, right? So they know they're on their app. And I told them, I say, listen, you're making an agreement with your trusted circle there that no matter what's going on, what's going down in your life, how bad you think it feels right now in this moment, you will not harm yourself. You're going to click not okay. Not okay. I'm not okay. You're going to stay there till they get to you on the side of the road. They might pick you up, go buy you a burger, whatever you need in that moment, right? So that sends out a signal to that whole circle like, hey, Jason's not okay. I'm on my way. I got him. I'm with him. Okay. So between that app being on their phone, this being on their wrist, those are tangible. Those are practical, because we know that young brain, the amygdala, we all talk about our fight or flight response. I tell these kids, your amygdala gets hijacked. The night that my son took his life, anger hijacked, anxiety, sadness hijacked the back of his brain, and it overruled his prefrontal cortex. And what does our prefrontal cortex do? I teach them all this early in the class: anger management, impulse control, higher level decision making. And they've already heard my story. So I say to them, do you think my son could have used some impulse control that evening? And they're like, not. Or anger in the heat of an argument with that young woman, do you think that would have come in handy? So I said, so listen, you're gonna have those moments. You will feel that way, but you have tools now to hang on with. And so those are two very practical tools I like. And then Jason and Jim, if you could put this in your notes too: QPR, question, persuade, refer, is, think of it as the CPR for mental health. So every parent, every coach, now in our state, teachers are mandated to be QPR trained. It's a 1-hour training, You can do it online. I took a more extensive one because I want to get certified to train, but you can do a 3-hour, you can do a 1-hour, but you can go to the QPR Institute and you can take that class. It's $29.95. You spend $30 at McDonald's, take that class. And I get these parents, and I feel for them. I get so many messages during the week through my inbox, through my email, of parents that are they don't know what to do. They don't know how to start the conversation. And that's another point I want to bring up. But I tell them, take QPR. It will teach you how to talk to your young person. It will teach you what to say, what not to say. And one big myth, if I can bust a few myths here while I'm with you guys this morning, you cannot, repeat after me, you cannot ever give anyone the idea of taking their life by asking them about it. It's 100% false. Evidence research says, so let me give you an example. So as we're talking this morning, you could say to me, hey, Leslie, are you thinking about taking your life? Are you thinking about dying by suicide? And I'd be like, no, I'm not today, not thinking about it. It's not up there. You can't put it in there. Now, if your teen has been thinking, or your young adult or your college student has been thinking about self-harm, maybe they even have a plan. You ask that question, and I want you to use the S word. Are you thinking about suicide? Have you thought about suicide? And then I want you to shut up. I don't want you to try to fix them. I don't want you to try to tell them, we're going to go get you help today. I want you to sit and listen, because that opens the door. And when you open the door and they know you've seen their pain and their hurt, then they feel like they can get the help they need. They feel like, because I'll tell you, and I just listened to this wonderful TEDx talk by Haley DeGreve. This is what I always tell everyone. No one ever wants to die by suicide. No one, no matter what their circumstances might be. And Jason, I know you lost your dad. And so, that in that moment, your dad didn't want to take his life. In that moment, my son didn't want to take his life. Their brains were overwhelmed with pain. Whatever their circumstances are, they don't want to die. They want to stop that immense amount of pain that's overriding their brain. And so what we have to do is realize we have got to be a country, a culture, a world that lets people talk about it and not stuff it. And young men, which I know you deal with all athletes, men, women, everything, but I want to talk about young men's mental health for a moment because of my son and because of Evan. They don't talk about their feelings, right? They're going to tough it out. And I think especially college athletes who, they get injured and we're so focused on their physical pain, like making sure they have an ice bath here for their muscles, or, like working in PT and getting their physical injuries healed, that we don't see the pain that's going on in their mental health. So I think, and one thing that I would like to, and I don't know how this would ever play out, but with colleges, the minute a student athlete gets injured, they get mental health resources.
Mm-hmm.
They need to go hand in hand. If you're going to put something on that ankle, you need to put something up here. So they go hand in hand because it is connected. Because don't you think that injury impacts their mental health too? 100%. I saw it take my son down his senior year. I just saw his countenance, his demeanor change after that third injury. So we need to get mental health right in there. It needs to be part of every sports program. You know, maybe we need to create new degree programs in colleges. I mean, and I don't know how that would look, but, we need to talk about this. And we have a scholarship at our son's high school. We'll give away our fifth scholarship this year. It's matched by what's called the Dollars for Scholars. So we give out a $4,000 scholarship at Austin's high school every year. Proud to say this year we'll give out over $20,000, but we changed it last year and we earmarked it for anybody that's going into any mental health related field. It can be social work, it can be psychology, counseling, anything. But we want the student to be pursuing mental health because we need more mental health resources, guys. We need them, right? And I have so many parents say, I don't know where to turn. And if I can just for one little tiny moment share with you or boast on where I work and what I do, I have two things that I do. Number one, I joined our community mental health center here called Oak Lawn Community Mental Health. In the middle of COVID, the CEO reached out to me. She had heard one of my keynote talks. They didn't have anything specifically just for suicide prevention yet in place. And they're big. They have 1,000 employees, 4 campuses. They work a lot in addiction and recovery services. Amazing community mental health center. But they are the ones that have gone out and helped me secure the funding and get these programs put in schools. We partner together. It's just been a great partnership. This coming Monday, they have been working on this for over 2 years, maybe even 3. They will become, I have to look it up because these acronyms in mental health are hard to remember. They will become a certified community behavioral mental health center. What does that mean? I'm going to tell you. 5 hours every day, open access. Anyone who's struggling can walk in the door and get assessed and seen 5 hours a day. You have to become a certified community behavioral mental health center. There's a lot of credentialing. There's a lot that goes into that. So what we need to do is make sure we have certified community mental behavioral health centers with open access to people, because we need to stop arresting people on the street because maybe they have schizophrenia, so we're going to put them in jail. Or, maybe there's an alcohol problem. That's not the solution. We need to get the help and the resources for these people and make sure that they're available. So that's something really cool that we're doing in my area. And another thing that I love that I would highly promote in every college, every high school is called a reset room. When I say a reset, I really mean kind of co-regulating your emotions when they get overwhelmed. So, for example, our high school got a $2,000 mini grant. This is Austin's high school, which now has sources of strength. They got a $2,000 micro mini grant. They got the grant in a matter of a week or two. It was really fast. And they took that money, and it's on my LinkedIn page, and I can post it again. And they built this beautiful room in there. It's called a reset room, right? Because we know, young people, they have an immature prefrontal cortex. They're impulsive. They do crazy things, and social media and just all kinds of things can happen. So there's a behavioral issue in the classroom. Kids acting out. Maybe something happened at home before they even got to school. We don't know. Rather than just expelling that kid and kicking him out, we're going to bring him up to the reset room. We're going to have a licensed clinical social worker, one of the counselors. They can listen to music. They can play. They can do different things in there. We're going to work on what we call co-regulating their emotions. We're going to work on teaching them how to cope in healthier ways with anger, anxiety, whatever's going on in their life. They get a time period up there, and then they get reset, and then they go back to class. So we need a reset room on every college campus. We need a reset room in every high school, middle school. And then Sources of Strength has a curriculum program. It's not peer run because they're little, but they have an elementary school model. So we need an evidence-based, wellness-based suicide prevention program in every school in the United States. And I'm here to tell you this is so affordable, guys. So I had one school asking me about the cost, and this is what sometimes my mama bear gets up there and I said, I'll tell you, it's less than my son's funeral was 5 years ago.
Yeah. Well, Leslie, we really appreciate the work that you're doing, and the proactive approach is what, I like about it, is because it's all about how you phrase things, the wellness piece of it. And so many things I've seen now over the last 20 years since I lost my dad with suicide prevention, it's focusing on the wrong things, in my opinion. And it's not focusing on the wellness piece, because we know what our brain focuses on is what, expands and grows, so focusing on wellness, acknowledging suicide for what it is, but being proactive about it, being, proactive about taking care of yourself, building strong relationships, mental and physical health, like you mentioned, some of those things. And so again, thank you for sharing with us today. And we always like to end with 4 questions with 40 athletes, though. So these are 4 simple questions that we like to get a little bit of insight with our guests before we finish. The first one is this: in your opinion, what does it mean to win in the game of life?
I've heard you ask this question a lot with your other guests, and I was thinking about it because I knew it was coming up this morning. For me to win in the game of life, I think means that, we live in, I think, this age of comparison, especially in adults too, right? But I think to win at the game of life for me, Jason, personally, is to really have those strong personal relationships in my life that I draw my source of strength from. And I'm a woman of faith. So I do, I am a Christian. And so I draw my source of strength first and foremost from Jesus Christ, but also my family. And I think rather than having this wide circle of, 1,000 people that you kind of know, maybe try to limit your circle and build your strength from, connection. And one of my favorite things in sources of strength that we say is connection is protection. So to win at the game of life, I think, is to really have really good quality, authentic relationships, very close circle of friends and family.
Yeah. Relationships are key to anything successful in life, right? Detriment or success, the healthier relationships, you'll find the healthier the people are as well.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
Okay. The second one is, if you could spend time with anyone you admire in sports, alive, passed away, fictional, non-fictional, who would you pick and why would you pick them?
Well, this might not come as a surprise to you, but it might come as a surprise to you. I'd probably pick Tim Tebow because, I followed him for years. I follow his faith. I follow the work that he does. I love the work he does with Down syndrome and the evening that he does for the kids once a year. So I love the aspect of generosity that he has. He doesn't have to do that with his time. He chooses to do that with his time. So I've always admired Tim Tebow.
Timmy Tebow. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Definitely. He's one I'd like to hang out with myself. Third question is what is the best advice you ever received from like a coach you've been around, maybe played for or worked for?
Gosh, that is such a good question. I was an executive recruiter for 12 years. And I worked in the actually pharmaceutical industry. So I dealt on the research side. So it was kind of a competitive, and I had a gentleman who was, I guess I call him my coach, my mentor, that really, really just worked. I didn't know anything about the recruiting industry and became, fairly successful at it. And he said to me, the first thing you need to do is get to know your person. He said, get to know him. And he said, and so, I've had 35 years of sales and marketing. And one of the best pieces of advice I was like, don't talk about business first. Talk about family. Look at their office and say, hey, what's their favorite team? And you get back to relationships, right, Jason? So I would always, and I've been, I don't say this to boast, but I've been very grateful in my career that I've been able to do so well. And, I've won some sales awards and trips and things like that. People always ask me, I said, I know very little, not that much about my product, but I know a lot about my customer. So I think it's really connecting with people. And he taught me that very young in life, like if you go in there and you connect with them, you have a customer, so I think just building the relationships with people and making it personal.
Like that. What is if you had one like character trait or life skill you could have in an individual, say you're recruiting or bringing in to work for your business, or you had a sports team and there were going to be an athlete that played for you, what would that one characteristic and life skill be and why?
Yeah, that's a good one. I go back to tenacity because, and I think this is, and I share this at the end, and this is probably going to maybe really be shocking to some people that hear this because my son took his life. And I went when we had his celebration of life service. Everybody dressed in red and white because those were his college colors and his high school colors. I said, we're here to celebrate his life today, 20 years of his life, not the last 1 minute of it, but 20 years of it. So I said, I hear Austin's voice a lot when I'm out working, and I said, I feel like tenacity, to be tenacious in life, and it goes back to resiliency, but my son got after it and he didn't give up and he didn't make excuses. And I feel like that's what keeps me going and keeps me driven is. So I think to have someone that I know that no matter what the challenge or the circumstance, because we're all going to go through something in life, we're all going to have obstacles and hurdles, but what do we do with that? Where do we take that? And, I had a real good mentor of mine say to me, she heard my first keynote and she had lost a brother to suicide. She came up to me afterwards and she goes, here's the deal, Leslie. She goes, it's just like this. When your pain hits your passion, it becomes your purpose. And that's really where I'm at. So I think the quality that I look for in people, we all have a story. Everybody has a story, is taking your story and being tenacious with it, never giving up with your story, because your story, you have no idea the impact it's going to have on someone else's life.
Hey, Leslie, something I want to mention before Jason kind of wraps this up is I love when you say we can live, they hear that 40 days without food, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's 3 days without water
Mm-hmm.
and 8 minutes almost without air, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you talk about you can only live 1 second without hope.
Mm-hmm.
And hope is really, when you think about it, it's just part of the mind, right? It's developing the mind. We focus so much on the body, but talk about this mental health, like the mindset of having hope when it looks the darkest of the time. And that's where, like I hear you talk about your passion and your purpose through the tragedy, like your son and what happened, but you're providing people hope, right? That there's a better tomorrow. There's a better next hour. There's a better next 10 minutes. There's something better through this, right? This doesn't define us. This isn't going to be here the whole time. See this hope in the little future in front of you.
Yeah. I love hope. And, it's the name of my organization, right? Leslie's Hope. So when I was developing my, and I'm not a social media expert or anything, but I hired a man to do my website last summer. And, they talk about search engine optimization and people being able to find you and this and that. And I said to him, here's the deal. I don't know what my name is going to be, but the word hope's going to be in it. Because with all the research I've done since Austin's death, and I've done a lot of research in neuroscience and brain health and all of that, I was blown away last summer when I was on a seminar with AFSP, American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, and one of their speakers came in and said, we've now clinically proved that hope, we talk about the 8 protective factors, I always like to add a 9th, hope. We've clinically proved that hope is a protective factor for the brain, because when you have hope, you're forward looking, right? You're forward looking. So I tell these young people that I speak to, I say, I don't know what's going on in your life today. And I said, I don't know how hard your morning was when you came in here, but I'm here to tell you, no matter what is going on or how hard your day is, your life is not going to be this hard forever. But if you're not here to see it, you won't know that. So we hold on, and that's called hope. And I tell them, I say, here's the thing. I said, it only takes 1 second of hope to be here tomorrow. So, if Austin or Evan could have held on to that 1 second of hope, and so many other young people, and I honor everybody today that's lost a student athlete to suicide. There's so many of us right now, as you well know, following that story. And so I honor every family that has lost a student athlete to suicide. And I say, let's make sure on our college campuses that we get good mental health resources in place, especially immediately after an injury. It's very important.
Yeah. Well, Leslie, where can I know you mentioned your website, but can you tell us again, like, where can we learn more about your work? Where can they find you on social media? Where can people connect with you, Leslie?
Sure. You can find me at Leslie, my first name, Leslie, at Leslie's Hope. It's just one word, no apostrophe, LESLIESHOPE.org. I do a lot of keynotes. I've just been invited to be the keynote speaker for the National Loss Team Conference. Loss stands for Local Outreach of Suicide Survivors. Jason, you and I are a suicide survivor. It'd be an honor for me if you come hear me. It's in Indiana this fall. And so the loss team is actually very well trained to respond immediately and help families in the aftermath of suicides. So because sometimes friends and family, they're all grieving. So the loss team is like a professional group of people that are trained. So we did not have a loss team available to us. One was not ready. Our county is training the third loss team in our state. So every county should have a loss team, and the importance of that. So I do a lot of speaking in schools, military bases, wherever. If you want to contact me to come and speak, you can reach me through Leslie at Leslie's Hope, and we can start that conversation.
Yeah. Well, Leslie, again, thank you for joining us today, and a lot of the insight and your vulnerability and your story. We greatly appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Jason. And I love the work you're doing with young people. Keep it up.
Thank you,
Leslie. You as well. Thank you.
Well, Jim, it was a really insightful interview today, and Leslie gave us a lot of great things to think about. And I think we have gone on this path too of like, how do we teach life skills to be proactive in our mental health and to give kids confidence? I think that's the big thing, is like believing in themselves, giving our kids hope sooner. So, Jim, can you tell us like the website that we have and the programs that we have that people can go to? And
yeah, they can go to 40athletes.com. And, something that we have on there is we have a program that parents can go through and help them understand how to navigate their child through sports. Because, when you think about what Leslie was talking about, she mentioned a couple of things I would love to dive into, but like self-worth and self-image. I mean, it's low amongst a lot of people. So how do you raise a self-image, right? She talked about identity, like her son's identity was in the football. How many times we hear these athletes or these people think, I'm a football player, I'm a basketball player, I'm this. No, you're not. That's what you do. You're a spiritual being that lives in this physical body. You're much more than that.
Yeah.
So it's like helping people understand how to raise children, like we talk about, to have that growth mindset, to not have to be perfect, right? Understand you being an athlete doesn't define who you are.
It's just,
and so, there's many different things besides that we go into, like I said, teaching the life skills and the character traits through sports. Because we always talk about, it's not so much you playing sports and your stats and your numbers and all that. It's who you become through what you're doing.
Yes.
So there's so much into it, but it was great, having Leslie on, and it speaks, I know, close to you because you can relate with what, like you said, the suicide, like she's talked about. What's the cost of this? Well, it's less than what it costs to bury my son. It's less what it costs to bury my father, right?
Well, and then one suicide, I think this was like 2017, I saw the average cost is about 1.2 million because of people like therapy, not working psychologically. So, whatever it is, it's much cheaper and life-giving than that too. So we'll probably have to have Lisa on again, or Leslie on again, to dive into more things that she talked about. But Jim, thank you for all your help today with the show, and a lot to dive into and unpack with this one. So thanks again.
Well, thank you, Jason, for all you do, man. Keep it up.